So maybe we'll go deep into those two parts. First the GMAT and then the rest of the application. So can you talk a little bit more about what you did for the GMAT? You mentioned you took a course.
Yeah.
Which course did you take?
I took a Kaplan prep course, and it was an in-person course that was, I don't know if they still offer these. They have their regular sort of GMAT prep courses, and then they have prep courses for people that want to score a 650 or higher or something. It's a little bit more aggressive. They go into a little bit more depth around the material and tactics for sort of, conquering the test. And so I did that. I can't remember how frequently it met, probably about once a week in the evening, and then supplemented those in-person lessons with take-home lessons and tests that you were essentially required to do. And so that was really good because it disciplined me. I feel like if I have free time, I'm generally gonna sit on my couch and watch a movie. I'm not generally disciplined enough to come home after a long day's work and open up a computer and practice my math skills. So I sort of needed a prep course to prompt me to do that. That really helped. Specifically what I was targeting were my weakness areas, which for me I knew were the quantitative elements. Qualitatively, I had taken a couple practice tests and done well on the qualitative sections. So I felt like I was fine there, and I spent most of my time and energy on the quant. And that was useful in the end. It was funny, they always tell you, don't neglect one particular section. Don't focus too heavily on one section, or else you're going to jeopardize your score on the other. And for me, that proved to not be the case. I definitely, my qualitative skills were fine. They were solid. My quant skills definitely needed help. And so I knew that, I targeted it, and I focused most of my studies there.
Okay. So did you use that Kaplan course as your one-stop shop in the end, or did you supplement that with anything else?
I pretty much did, yeah. It was my one-stop shop. It was, I liked the materials that they, supplemented the virtual tests with. They also, essentially advised or required that we take one practice test per week, I believe. Which got us to sort of, understand the module, see how the application works, etc. And then they also included the opportunity at the end of the course to go into the test center and take an in-person test as if you were taking it for, the real thing. And that helped to get used to the environment, to get over some of your nerves, etc. Nevertheless, I still didn't finish the quant section, which is the worst thing they tell you to do, or they tell you not to do, whatever you do, finish the section, and I was about 4 questions short of finishing. I don't know what happened on the day of. I think my nerves just got the better of me, and I was thinking too much on each question, focusing on getting it right and not getting to the end of the test. So as a result, my quant score still suffered, but it was good enough that I think it got me to that benchmark to get into most top schools.
And what did you ultimately score when you took the GMAT?
I got a 710.
Oh, that's a great score. And if you're as somebody who got a good score and that allowed you to get into the school that you wanted to go to, do you have, looking back on your experience, do you have one main tip that you could share with people prepping for the GMAT?
If you're someone like me who doesn't come from a heavy quant background, or if you're someone who also, knows that their particular weakness is, on the verbal section, for example, give yourself plenty of time to focus on that. Don't rush this process. Because for me, having a full-time job meant that I had limited time and limited mental bandwidth to handle it, and I recognized that I could only give so many hours a day before my brain just was like, all right, enough, Veronica. So giving myself at least 2 months in advance of the test to fully prep, I think made a big difference. Had I rushed that process, I don't think I would have done nearly as well.
Okay, that's a great tip. So now moving on to the rest of the application, let's jump into the essays, because I think that is the area that for most people take up the most time and effort. Can you talk a little bit about your approach to writing the essays?
Yeah. So these were probably the hardest part of the application, and I think they're probably the hardest for most people. That blank page, staring me in the face, was just exceptionally difficult to tackle. So again, a huge element here was time. I gave myself a lot of time to complete it. I didn't target most schools' first round deadlines because I didn't want to rush myself and submit an application that was sort of subpar. So even for Berkeley that has 4 rounds, I submitted my application for the 3rd round rather than the 1st or 2nd. And I think that actually helped me rather than hindered me because I made sure it was sort of quality, right? Secondly, I started by, just elements of, self-reflection where I took time to like sit back before I even started writing, read through the questions and sit with them for a couple of days. Just think about them and reflect about them in the shower, on the bus, before you go to sleep, whatever. And then, you have to start writing. So most of the time I realized that if I tried to structure my thoughts too much when I first started writing, nothing flowed. I'm the type of person that thinks about every sentence and every statement, and so if I did it that way, it just never came out. It was too difficult to write. So it was just stream of consciousness, getting it on paper. Another trick that I used, which I recommend to people if they sort of think through things like me, is I used an audio recorder, especially at night. These essays kept me up at night, probably like a lot of people, and while I was sitting in bed thinking about how to phrase a response or how to do this or that, I would just grab an audio recorder and verbally walk through my thoughts. Even if they sounded like, a jumble at the end, it helped me sort of get it out and not forget it the next day when I was ready to write. And then secondly, I think, it was bouncing these ideas off of friends and taking time with it. So for example, Berkeley used to have a question around, if you could have dinner with any person, past, present, or future, who would it be and why? And I didn't have a good answer for this when I first thought about it. It took me a really long time. And it wasn't until a few weeks later, and almost like up until the deadline of the application, that I was having dinner with a friend, and we were talking about the food and talking about how much I loved the food and the taste and the scents and the smells. And he was like, you should write about a chef that you really admire. And, it hit me at that moment that it was, if I could have dinner with anyone, it would be Alice Waters, the founder of Chez Panisse. And it really came together about, I admire her for a lot of different reasons, because she's a woman in a male-driven industry, because she is devoted to sustainability, and she's a damn good cook. So, I mean, there were a lot of things there, but in other words, it didn't come out until I had just a casual conversation with a friend, rather than forcing it and trying to get something artificial on paper.
And I like that story because it actually adds a really good personal touch to your essays and reveals something about yourself that maybe isn't directly relevant to the business world. It sounded like you tied elements into that, but the primary thrust was more about personal, like who you are personally. And so can you maybe talk a little bit more there about in that essay or maybe the rest of the application about how you sort of added elements of you as, as a person?
It's a balance, right? Because, that essay was about someone who, a leader in the culinary world, an industry that I have, I love food, but I have zero desire to pursue it as a professional career. So none of what I stated about what I admired about Alice Waters were professionally driven. It was all around her character and how she'd sort of progressed through her career and how she'd sort of balanced her personal goals and sort of professional pressures as a result. And so how I could sort of mirror my own professional life and how I admired her because of those traits. And then, so that was sort of like, I guess I turned it into a personal essay by focusing on the traits that I really admired and that I was trying to sort of mimic. And then, I made sure that the other essays that I had around leadership experience and background and goals, etc., were entirely focused on, me as a person and my professional career in particular. So how I had progressed at Blue Shield, how my undergraduate supported that, how the international experience then came in, and sort of where did this, where do I come out as a person today when I'm writing this essay? Who am I? That was sort of the big question that I focused on in all the others.